And we are.
Gotcha. You can just explain.
All right. Sorry, you guys. We're using a webinar account that might have other people. It's a big account, and so I think somebody might have tried to log in, and I apologize for that. So we're at 79 right now. We're close to what we were at. So can you guys see the salmon still? Yeah.
No, good? I don't see I see your face, but I'm not seeing the second.
No, not that one yet. We're getting it. Hold on.
Let's take our time. Everyone's
enjoying this.
Supportive. I hope people have a glass of wine or a cup of tea.
Yes. Because this is a really
we're just happy to be together talking about Shakespeare and food.
Oh, there we go. This really is a cool recipe, that's why. And so if you have a piece of salmon like mine, what you're going to do is you want pieces that are about equal in size, about 2 inches by 3 inches. And what ends up happening is if you have this little tail at the end, it's usually thinner. So what I actually do is I'll tuck it underneath, and then I'm going to cut sections of this. And then for area, so you want it about equal size. And so I'll cut this in half. And then I'll do this too. So I've got even pieces of fish that I'm then going to put into inside my parchment. Now let's get the rest of the ingredients together. These are the other great ingredients. We have some pistachios, artichoke bottoms. So if you don't know what artichoke bottoms are, Instacart didn't know either. So artichoke hearts are what we normally see in the grocery store. And so it's an artichoke, and it's got like that kind of side coming up. Even the canned ones, even the frozen ones have a little bit more of that leaf to it. These are artichoke bottoms. And so it's just the bottom of the artichoke, and you can find them in the can section usually. And there's about 8 or 9 in each one. And so you only need about half. So I have 4 that I'm going to use, and I'm going to slice them. So I'm just going to thinly slice them. And if you want to cut them smaller, you sure can. Then the other ingredient are green grapes. Now the recipe says that you can also use gooseberries. Gooseberries are a little hard to find, but I don't want you to make the mistake that I made. Nowadays you see these guys around, and I'm sure this could probably work well inside. These are Cape Cod gooseberries. They are not, or golden berries. They are not real gooseberries though. They look similar, but they're not the same. So you could probably use these. If you've never tried them before, they're really good. They're tart, but they have more of a bite. It has like more of a skin on it. So I've got green grapes that I'm going to use, and you can just roughly chop them. I halved them. It's really cool having the grapes inside, just because it lends that sweetness and that little sourness to this dish. And then, so I've got all these on the side. And then I have asparagus. So 6 or 12, so I'm doing half, so 6 asparagus stalks. I just wanted to show you, when you buy these asparagus, what you want to do is you want to flex or kind of bend at the asparagus. Where it breaks, so if it breaks there, that's where I'm going to chop from. Most asparagus is picked as a bunch, and so they're around, and so they're growing at the same time. So you can just pop one and then cut from there. And then I want 1-inch sections, okay? And you don't need to blanch them. You don't need to do any of that. The residual heat, the heat from that puff pastry and the steam will cook that for you. And then we have mussels, smoked mussels. So I bought a can. You can buy whatever kind you want. You can use oysters too. I actually was able to find oysters easier than I was able to find mussels. They smell really good. They're smoked, and so they lend that kind of smoky flavor to it. Now let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my salmon, grab a bowl, and I'm going to season my salmon. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. And if you guys have not seen this, I'm about to lose it. This is fresh nutmeg. So nutmeg comes in a nutmeg, like a nut like this. It lasts a lot longer. If you don't use that much nutmeg at home, buy them like this, use a microplane, and just shave as much as you need. And then you can take that nutmeg and you can use it. This lasts a lot longer than if you were using the pre-ground stuff. So I'm just gonna mix that, make sure everything is seasoned, and there we go. Now I'm gonna grab I'm gonna move everything to the side. Switch it around, because I did this once, and I did not do it on the actual parchment, and that was a mistake, because transferring it was not easy. So I've got that. I'm gonna kind of figure out where half is. So I'm gonna cut this in half, just like that. I'm gonna keep one side, keep a piece to the side. And I'm gonna lay my salmon piece. Oh, I'm gonna start with my asparagus right on the bottom. And then I'm gonna lay my salmon on top. So fit what you can. You'll play around with the proportions a little bit. That little piece was extra. Just like that. And then I'll add my mussels and my asparagus, my grapes. And then the most important part was the chopped pistachios. And so I'm going to chop up some pistachios. What I found was also, if you do half of it, you're left with one piece, an extra piece of the puff pastry, so you can make some designs. And I'll show you how I did some of the designs. So I'm going to grab some pistachios. And get them already kind of hulled for you so it's easier. And just you can put them in the food processor to do like a really fine grind on them. Or if you feel comfortable enough with the knife, just go in there and chop it up as fine as you can. Again, this provides that really cool crunch. And pistachios just have a really cool flavor that most nuts don't, or it's just a different flavor. So I'm going to add that, sprinkle that right on top. Just like that. All right, now I'm going to grab my saved piece of dough, and I'm going to put it right on top and pinch. Now comes the fun part. You're going to make this into a fish, or try to make it into a fish, or design it to be so. So I grabbed a knife, and I kind of just played around with it. Made that part, and make sure you seal it all so that nothing comes out. And this is when that extra piece sometimes helps. So I'm going to keep going around. Right. And then a tail. So what I did was I pushed one end in, and I can kind of get a tail out of here. Or that could be the head area too. But then what I did was I took the dough and any extra flour you might have, roll it out. And if you have a cutter or something that can kind of give you a shape of a scale, you can go around and you can put the scales on. This takes a long time, so take your time with it, but you can lay your scales on, or you can take a spoon and you can make indentations throughout the whole thing, okay? So you would just go through the whole thing and make indentations. And then you're going to brush it with a little bit of your egg wash, because you're using puff pastry, and sometimes adding the egg wash on top and then putting the scales on helps too. And then you're gonna pop this in your oven and you're gonna bake it. I'm gonna bake it for about 40 minutes, 20 minutes, and then I checked on it a little bit after that. And so then after that, we take it out of the oven and bam, we have a full fish ready to go. So I don't know if you guys can kind of see that. There we go. All right, so with the scales and the tail. Should I cut through this, Julia? Francine, should I cut through it?
Sure.
Yeah. let's
Go
see
for
what
it,
it's
right?
like,
All right,
yeah.
I've been waiting to cut through it. So I am going to cut it and show you what it looks like inside. I'm going to take my knife and cut right through the middle. And there's this beautiful filling. I just want to show you the layers, that's why, because it's really pretty. But there you go. There's like that beautiful filling right in the middle. So it's very impressive and not that hard, everyone. Okay, and you can play around with the ingredients, like do different types of filling, do a different vegetable, whatever's around. But it was a lot of fun to make, Francine. So thank you for sharing that.
So are there some things to be careful with, like not make it too wet? And Francine, I know you've cooked this dish also. If we were going to experiment with the recipe and add different kinds of vegetables, would you like, the asparagus is probably good because it's kind of on the drier side. Won't get your
Yeah, I love playing around with things, but I often like to try it the first time the way it was intended, except if you really know your ingredients well. This combination was really, really great because too strong of a flavor, like broccoli would overpower the fish. So try it the way it was written first, and then sure, if you have trouble, I mean, certainly as Jessica found, instead of artichoke hearts, you could use instead of the bottoms, you could use artichoke hearts, gooseberries, grapes, any color grapes. So, but it's really fun, and it's really the artist in you, and any kids at home who would like to do a little sculpting. It really is kind of fun to play with your food.
Well, I know you started this as a kind of cooking project with your kids for school, and it became a cookbook.
Exactly, really, really fun.
Amazing that one can learn history and drama through these tactile activities. Before we move back to the PowerPoint, there's a couple of questions here about this dish from our audience. One is from Valerie, who asks whether either of you can recommend a wine to pair with the salmon.
Francine?
White wine, your favorite white wine, a nice dry white wine that you would drink with fish. Salmon is nice and oily, and so that I think it can stand up to whatever you'd like, a good Chardonnay.
And then Ellen Mirowitz asks if there's a kosher substitute for the smoky mussels or oysters. What would you add if you were trying to do
you could omit them.
You could omit them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I probably wouldn't want to go with anchovy or anything too strong, right?
Maybe a little. I mean, I think anchovy is always good in everything. And so I think a little anchovy would be excellent. Good call, Julia.
And Sue Purcell says, how about chestnuts?
Yum, that's good thinking. Yes, that's a good ingredient substitution. And feeling of the Elizabethan period of a food that they really loved. Good choice.
Wow. Well, we're going to turn back to the PowerPoint and hear about the end of the meal, the dessert course, and then we'll return to Jess and get some more suggestions about how to cook some of these desserts.
Wonderful. So now let's talk for a little second about the foods that Shakespeare didn't have, that they didn't have in Shakespeare's time. So there was no chocolate, no tea, despite the fact that England is so known for tea, no coffee, no chili peppers, no corn, no cranberries, no potatoes, no tomatoes. These were all foods that were discovered after Columbus, after the New World, and did not become popular in England until much later. In fact, there was pasta, but it wasn't eaten with tomatoes. It would have been eaten, for example, with prunes, cooked prunes. And in fact, in Shakespeare's day, prunes were often a synonym for a wanton woman. And they were often actually served in brothels as well, as they were thought to provoke passions. So foods that they didn't have, but they had lots and lots of foods that would be shared for dessert. Now, what happened is that you'd have that first course, all the little foods, then you would have the second course with bigger foods. In between, there would be entertainments, you'd be telling jokes, there would be wow dishes, and the idea that now we've come to the dessert, everyone knows each other better, and things can get more bawdy and closer and even more fun. And so the jokes would have gotten even more intense. And there were lots that were recommended during the dessert period, in case you were too shy in the first or second course. And so one of my favorites is basically the idea that a man is at home and he hears a burglar break in the middle of the night, and he starts laughing, and the burglar is like, why are you laughing? And the man says, I don't know what you're going to find here in the dark. When I'm in the daylight, there's nothing of value that I ever see in my house. These are plates called rondelles that were the dessert plates. These are in a museum in England, and if you can look very, very closely, you see some writing. And that's because each of these plates had little funny sayings or whimsical poems, bawdy jokes. For example, this one is, a person who is generous with giving wine is never going to lack for anything. Or this one that's written on one of the plates, they made fun of lawyers forever, since ancient Roman times. Here lies a miracle denied who can. He lived a lawyer and an honest man. Poor lawyers. Now, the plates themselves were sometimes bawdy. This was from an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Gives new meaning to breastplate. This dessert plate also, I just go a little closer so you get a sense of what was pictured in this plate. Anyway, this whole dessert course was considered to be an aphrodisiac. They wanted the guests to leave the dinner party and to go forth and multiply, to have fun. And so often, especially in the dessert, there would be aphrodisiacs. So certain fruit that was shaped like body parts were considered aphrodisiacs. So for example, these were called fruit nipples, raspberries and cherries. And fruit was considered to be very luscious looking and very sensual. But the desserts themselves were recreated into body parts. This is called nun's breasts, dessert that is still actually popular today. The dessert course always included cheese and nuts, just as it would today, cheese, nuts, and fruit. We see from this reference in Merry Wives of Windsor. And they would make all sorts of desserts with those ingredients. So there were wonderful nuts cooked with sugar into different kinds of brittles. And they would use every part of the fruit. Fruit was very precious. They would candy it when it was in season. They would candy the peels of the fruit. They would never waste anything. And this dessert, which Chef Jessica will make for us tonight, is a citrus tart. And the tart was made with lemon and orange peels that were candied and then simmered with vinegar and pepper. Very interesting combination that they prized back in Elizabethan times. They would have served slowly candied fruits of all kinds as part of the meal. And of course, the famous Christmas plum pudding, which would have been seen on an Elizabethan table. Because if you've ever made plum pudding, you know that it is all sorts of dried fruits that are simmered with spirits, and it lasts forever and it stays moist. So it's a wonderful dessert, and they prized it for that flavor combination and for its long lasting. This line shows us shows us that certain interesting spices were used in desserts. Now, a warden was a pear in Elizabethan English, and so this pie would have had saffron and pear. Nowadays, we think nothing of these Michelin star chefs that will use interesting combinations of spices in desserts, but this is something that dates certainly to the Middle Ages and Renaissance. They also made vegetables into desserts. In fact, the person who found that you could extract sugar from parsnips was given a knighthood by Queen Elizabeth. So this is a delicious spinach pie that's mixed with spinach, ground almonds and sugar, and then topped with some other nuts, pine nuts. And of course, we've got vegetables as desserts still today, rhubarb pie and carrot cake. But there were some even more unusual ones in Shakespeare's time, including beets used in desserts. They sugar-coated spices. Spices, this is a beautiful painting illustrating sugar coating these spices. And the idea of spices, especially during the dessert course, was something that was very prized. Spices were very expensive. 2 nutmeg would be the equivalent of a skilled carpenter's 1 month salary. This is a recreation of an Elizabethan banquet table showing a gingerbread house, perhaps a recreation of the guest of honor's home. Beautiful stained glass looking tarts made with jams, and ginger and all of these spices were really valued. In fact, gingerbread house, we get a little bit from that Elizabethan tradition of showing an esteemed house to guests. And all of these spices, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, all of these spices were thought to tingle the tongue. Any of those that were thought to tingle the tongue, it was also believed that they would tingle other places as well. And so they were considered aphrodisiacs and always included in the dessert course. After the dessert, the tables would have been picked up, because tables weren't the way we think of today. They were not big dining tables that were sold. They were created to put on sawhorses. And so the table would have been picked up so that everyone could dance and there could be more entertainments. So now let's be entertained with how to create our own dessert. And so we'll go back to Chef Jessica so that we can learn how to make citrus tarts.
Making the rose cookies.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no,
Oh my
you're
goodness.
okay. No.
I wrote that. Okay, so I didn't even show you a picture of the rose cookies. My bad. Okay, I sent everyone, I think, the citrus tart recipe, but the rose cookies, let me just say, while Chef Jessica gets everything together, the rose cookies were from a recipe that was handwritten, and there was it's only in the Folger library because there's just one copy of this book. A woman, Sarah Long, wrote this book as a gift, perhaps to her niece. Oh, thank you, Julia, for a picture of the rose cookies. And the idea of using flowers, besides using, of course, vegetables, was very, very common. They would use flowers in their salads and, of course, in their desserts, and rose water and orange blossom were very popular. So we're going to learn to make this adorable, beautiful rose cookie. However, in the list of recipes that Chef Jessica is going to send you, I do think that we've got the citrus tarts, so you can make them.
All right, so I have a pound of butter. Oh, no, sorry, not a pound of butter, half a pound of butter, 2 sticks of butter in here. And the recipe says to wash the butter with rose water. I believe that's what it said. And so we're not going to do that, but we are going to add some pretty cool stuff inside, including rose water and rose petals. And so I will get that. I'll show you that in a little bit. But in that butter, we're going to do what we do for baking most of the time, especially cookies, and that is we're going to cream butter and sugar together. This is probably the most important step of any baked goods or anything that you're trying to make in regards to a cookie, because butter and sugar react really well together, but they have to be combined well in order for it to actually react. And so if you've ever looked at sugar and felt it in between your hands, it's like little blades almost. It's sharp. What you're doing when you're creaming is you're actually incorporating that sugar, those little knives, into the butter, and it's cutting it then, so that each little piece of sugar is coated with a little bit of butter, and that's where you get that great mouthfeel. And so we're going to cream these guys together, and we're going to add egg yolks, and we're also going to add some heavy cream. So I'm going to start by separating my egg yolks, the eggs though, so that you can do this correctly. Now, what are you going to do with extra egg whites at home? I always tell people they're great for your face and great for your hair. Just don't use hot water. So if you have extra egg whites, old egg whites actually beat up better. So if you're interested in making macaroons, things like that, easier to make with old egg whites. So to separate them, though, you're going to get yourself 2 bowls. You're going to hit once, and you're going to let that egg white fall off. Now, cold eggs are easier to separate, but when you're baking, you want to use room temperature ingredients, okay? We're going to do it one more time. Separate it, let it fall through. If you ever get any kind of eggshell in there, like I did, not that we're using our egg whites, the inside of the egg has kind of a thin membrane. It almost acts like a magnet, and it'll attract that eggshell for you, so you don't have to use your finger to go in and dig it out. Just use a part of the eggshell, dip it in, and then you'll get it out. So we're not going to use our egg whites, but we are going to use our egg yolks in a little bit. I'm going to come on over, and I'm going to turn this guy on. Turn this thing on. There we go. And we're going to cream. Now, if you don't have a KitchenAid, completely okay. Handheld mixer will work, and if you do it by hand, it does work. It just takes a little bit of time, okay? So just make sure if you are doing it by hand that it's a pretty smooth and fluffy consistency that you're at before you start adding other things. And that's it. So now I'm going to add my heavy cream. I have a 1/4 cup of the rose syrup. I'm going to only add half of it. And then I'm also going to add my 2 egg yolks in there. Splashing people, it's not nice. And whenever you're doing this, you will notice it looks like it's curdled. It's completely okay. And there we go. Now, this is like a shortbread, and so it doesn't have any kind of leavening agent. The leavening agent is probably, if anything, that little bit of egg yolk that you added. We're going to add flour inside, though, and we're going to add pastry flour. Pastry flour is not easy to find these days. I have had a hard time. So Bob's makes a really good pastry flour. Now, why do you use pastry flour? The reason why you use pastry flour is because it gives it a lighter texture. Inside different flours, depending on what it's for, there's gluten inside. So the higher the gluten content, the chewier it will be. So bread flour, for example, is very high gluten, and so it ends up being too chewy of a cookie. This is a light cookie that kind of just breaks apart, and I'll show you what it looks like. So we're going to use pastry flour. So if you don't have pastry flour, I would say use all-purpose flour. You could try cake flour, but cake flour does have cornstarch in it usually, so that sometimes doesn't work. I did not try it with it. I was able to find pastry flour after a while. So I'm going to mix it. And you're only going to mix it until it forms a dough. So don't overwork it. And that's it. So once that dough comes together, you're ready to go. All right. And then you're just going to take this dough and you can shape it into rounds. Or if you want, you can mold these. And so I played around with a spritzer with this dough. Doesn't work well in a spritzer because it's a little too wet. So what I would say is if you have a mold or like a cookie cutter, you could use it in the shape of a cookie cutter. I have a mooncake mold. And so this mooncake mold will kind of give me that design if I push it out. And I did kind of, but it does, you can't see it really well, but there is a shape on there. So if you want, make them into rounds, which I did, and I baked them off. And then when you're ready, I'm gonna grab a cutting board. Once these have baked off, you're left with these really cute little rounds, like the ones that Julia showed you. And I've got that extra rose syrup. I have that extra rose syrup right here. And then I have candied rose petals. Now, these I was able to find on Amazon. They're not cheap. And so if you want, you can actually make edible flowers really easily. All it takes is egg whites and sugar. So you get your edible flowers, and they need to be edible. Bristol Farms has really great edible flowers if you're around a Bristol Farms. But you don't want just flowers that you pick off the side of the road. You don't know what has been sprayed on it and so forth. So just be careful with that. You want real edible flowers, and then you just coat them with a little bit of egg white and then sprinkle them with sugar, and they'll dry. So if you want, try to buy egg whites that are pasteurized if you're worried about that. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to crush some. And the rose syrup, we have a lot of great Persian markets around us, and they actually have a good selection of rose syrup. You can buy French rose syrup too, so different types of rose syrup. And there's my powder. So I'm going to take a little bit of this syrup, brush each of these cookies with it, and then sprinkle that really pretty rose petal right on top. And that pink is really pretty too, right there. And there you are. These really pretty little rose cakes. There you go.
Gorgeous, gorgeous.
Is so pretty. Are there other things that you can use that rose petal powder for? That's such a pretty product.
I would say you could put it on anything, even cakes. It's fragrant, but it is that rose water taste or flavor. So you have to like that. I love it. So I like rose ice cream even. So
Mariam Hassani has a question for us. She asked, would the actual rose petal non-candied work?
That would be a little chewy. But if you broke it up, you know, like just because a whole petal might be a little chewy to bite into with the cookie. But if you slivered it, although it's very easy to just, you know, as Chef Jessica said, to just brush a petal with some egg white and sugar, or put it into a dehydrator. And so then you'll get little crumbles if you'd like.
And then you did this food styling, is that right, Francine, for your book?
Yep.
And so there you have the fresh petals as decor, with the
Exactly.
rose cookie. And it looks like you might also have maybe some thyme or baby mint
I
or
think
something
that,
that you've added there.
yeah, I think to just make the plate little, the food stylist put something, it does look like thyme, just to kind
Or
of
is it-
give something green. I mean, mint is often something that we will see on a dessert plate. But I also think that if you play around with edible flowers, not only that wonderful fragrance of the rose, but lilacs, there, it's really interesting. And especially with chocolate, you could just take some chocolate and melt that and then incorporate your flowers into it. And so then when you dip strawberries into it, you get this wonderful combination of the floral and the fruit, something that the Elizabethans really enjoyed. And I love that idea of the flowers, just like they were so precious with keeping their fruit, the same with edible flowers. And I love one of the instructions, which we could all copy kind of once we can have a Zoom dinner party. But the instructions on how to make a salad fit for a prince was the exact title of it. And the idea is to take a big salad bowl and put a roll at the bottom of the bowl so that the center will look higher when you put all the greens. And then to take a tall branch of rosemary and stick it into the roll so that it sort of is a centerpiece in the salad. And then to dangle from the rosemary pairs of cherries when they're in season, and you can get 2 cherries hanging, or whatever comes to your mind. But that idea of that kind of thoughtfulness into the visual look of a dish, I find very compelling. And they even had instructions on how to replicate a flower, how to make a flat sort of salad that incorporates with the colors and the arrangements of vegetables and fruit. If you look from above, it looks as if it's just a wonderful flower or garden. So very artistic, because interestingly, today we'll put a vase on our dinner table, but they didn't in Shakespeare's time. They would have thought we were crazy to put flowers. Anything on the table is fair game, it's edible. And so no, the flowers would have been eaten from the vase, but you could have it in your salads.
Oh, that's great. Couple of questions here. Sue Purcell is curious, do you know whether there were more or less food allergies during this period?
That's an interesting question, because someone asked about food allergy like nuts, which are so common today, and asked as a substitute for the pistachios if you have a nut allergy. And so, you can always leave it out, or put whatever your crunchy substitute is. But I don't know, and that's an excellent question. I've never seen a reference saying, if this ingredient makes you ill, use this. I've never seen that reference. And I'm wondering, and maybe we'd have to turn to a physician or nutritionist in the audience to tell us, I'm wondering if as we progress and the ingredients are less pure, perhaps, we develop allergies, or maybe you just
Or
didn't have
child
much variety.
mortality, that the allergies would just have killed the less hardy children. And by the time they became adults, if they had survived all those meals, I don't know. Of course, there was also all that poisoning and,
Right. I mean, they
high
did. They absolutely did reference that they thought some foods, especially some foods eaten at some parts of the day, were very dangerous. For example, milk was not something that was recommended to be drunk. In fact, there were many things written about milk being unhealthy for you. So perhaps some lactose thing. Certainly water, even water. They used to write that
beer.
water was unhealthy. In fact, Shakespeare has a line, "She is false as water," because water was so dangerous. You could get sick. And they didn't know about germs, but they just knew water wasn't to be trusted. And so there were some things that they wouldn't eat, but I don't know about allergies. I will look that up.
That's great. Suze also would love to see a presentation of table settings throughout the ages. So maybe that's something we could do for another session. It would also be interesting to look at table settings around the world and how different cultures like to present their grander meals and what some of the conventions are.
It is very fascinating, and beside the tableware itself, but even the dish is a very interesting to peek at historically and different cultures. I mean, the one I'm thinking of, the wonderful boxes, Japanese boxes, where food is presented at this marvelous opening of a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been reading The Life of Cleopatra, getting ready to teach Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. And it's amazing to read about these feasts, and some of their food ways are quite fascinating. We're going to end in a few minutes. We will be sending out the recipes, and we can probably include, is the rose cookie recipe in the packet? Because I could just photocopy it and add it if it's not in there. But it is great. Maybe we could end by, Francine, you're just telling us about how you came to write this book.
I will. And I also want to mention, just talking about the fancifulness of the table, I want to just mention one page that sort of shows to the extent that the host would go to amuse and to entertain you. And so this one explanation was that the chef should create a ship, a pastry ship, a ship made out of dough as a centerpiece, and then to give every guest a dinner roll in the shape of a cannon to kind of keep this battleship theme going. And the ship, the little rolls that look like cannons, should have some kind of accelerant on them, some camphor that could be lit and would make a little popping sound, so that it would sound as if there was in fact a sea battle. Then they advised that you give every lady at the table an egg that had been hollowed out and filled with scented water, with the instruction being, when the ladies start to hear the noise of the cannons popping, that they should throw their eggs on the floor so that it makes an additional popping, but so the wonderful fragrance of the eggs kind of gets away these sulfur smells from the rolls. So this is a pretty elaborate dinner party. That's even before the first bite is taken of your food.
Right. I think I've read that one. It's a wonderful cookbook that was written after the English Civil War, but remembering the glories of the court of Charles I. And so it was very much a royal setting and quite elaborate, really a whole narrative there that was kind of dramatized. It was quite extraordinary. But there's also nice, interesting cookbooks written by women of the period as well. Hannah Woolley, for example, who taught women and was quite an interesting character. And she has some very charming, more modest kinds of recipes, more Protestant, if you will, kinds of recipes that still are quite evocative of the time. So it's great.
Well, even in Shakespeare's time, there were handwritten manuscripts like the Sarah Long. And of course, a home cook would have more modest expectations. But again, you have to remember that back then, literacy was so low. So who was reading this cookbook? You're talking about the top 5% of the population who could have a home, who could entertain this way, who could read. And so clearly the cookbooks were much simpler. And in fact, I'm often asked at the end of these talks, these things are kind of fancy with the swans and the peacocks. By the way, someone asked, what does swan taste like? Tastes like chicken. No, I don't know actually. Although even written in the cookbooks of Elizabethan time, there were references to the fact that it's pretty, but it doesn't taste so great. Even back then, they did love the taste so much.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here. Chef Jessica, always so great to work with you. I put in the chat, we have a wonderful director coming on February 9th from the New York Public Theater to talk about some of his productions. We also have on the Illuminations YouTube channel a lot of great cooking shows by our faculty who have been cooking from home and sharing their recipes and their food ways with the campus. So we're keeping things going here. This was just a delightful presentation. And we have people from mainly California, but also from New Jersey and elsewhere. So it's really great to have such a wonderful group gathered here in honor of Shakespeare's Kitchen. And some applause, from some chat applause. So you've been a great audience. And we'll see you at another event. It was really great to host you.
It was wonderful sharing this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.